This is the MixCoach podcast, number 113. Hey, what if I told you that you could have any keyboard, any singer, any song, and any length of time to do a mix? Could you do it? Or do you think it would hold you back? I actually think it would hold you back. Check out this podcast, and I'll explain why. Let's just pretend for a second and imagine what it would be like if we had any mic we ever wanted. We could work with any singer that we ever wanted, any song we ever wanted, and just the resources that were at our fingertips were just there. We didn't have to worry about anything. We had as much time as we needed to do anything. I think that that's probably the worst way to be creative. Being creative is an exercise in limitations. If you have unlimited resources, you're probably not going to get anything unless you have at least one limitation. And most of the time, that limitation is a deadline. It's a time. It's you have to have this finished by this certain time. So John and I were talking the other day. We were talking about creativity and what inspires creativity. So just before you go to the podcast, let me remind you that this podcast is brought to you by MixCoach Member. This is our membership website that trains people, and we use limitations to improve our mixers. So if you want to improve your mixing, the best way to get better is just to mix consistently, ask questions, and get feedback. And that's what we do every month at MixCoach Member. We give our members a session to download, a video tutorial that covers that session, a live Q&A webinar where you can bring any questions about that month's content or mixing in general to me and John and whoever we have on the call. You also have a chance to turn in your mix to one of the coaches and let them give you feedback on it. Now, that's optional, but we do offer that, and I think that is a great way to improve. Okay? So come check us out at mixcoachmember.com. But for now, check out the podcast.
So today I wanted to talk a little bit about the inspiration process, and how potentially inspiration can come from some strange places, like deadlines. Just earlier this week, I had a mix that was in, and I was, kind of struggling, to come up with, what I wanted to do with it. And a lot of times I'll add loops and things like that. So I was kind of trying to struggle with how the production laid out in the song. And whenever it came down to it, it was like, well, the person who gave me this mix didn't really have a deadline, but let me set a deadline for myself of I have to be done with this song by the end of today or the end of tomorrow, I think it was. And inevitably woke up the next day, started rocking it out, and the inspiration just came. It hit. And a lot of that has to do with the fact that a lot of things, expand and contract based on how much time we give them, and if we don't set deadlines for ourselves, some things just don't get done. Right.
I was thinking about this just yesterday, actually. I was thinking, okay, if I gave a group of musicians any keyboard sound and every keyboard sound they wanted, every drum sample known to man, any DAW they wanted to pick out, any mic and mic preamp, any vocalist they wanted to use, and said, okay, go for it. I want you to create a song. Most people are like me, I'm assuming, would probably freeze up under those conditions because there are so many choices. And, we've talked about this in past podcasts, how when you have too many choices, you are afraid. And I know I talked about this yesterday. I am afraid that I'm going to make the wrong decision. I'm going to start off the wrong way. And a lot of times for creative people like us who mix and who write songs and do things like that, we're always afraid we're going to do it wrong. But then I took the situation where I said, okay, what if I took that same group of people and I said, okay, here is a kick sample that you have to use some form of, a snare sample that you have to use some form of, a bass patch that you have to use, and here's a pre-existing vocal that has a hook in it. 4 things that you have to use, and you've only got 3 hours to finish it. I can imagine what would happen with that, because you've got creative people who have limitations, and that's where creative people get creative. Because if you think about it, now they've got one kick sound, and they're going, okay, this is the kick I'm handed, but I wish it was a little lower, or I wish it was a little longer. They would probably stretch it out or drop the pitch on a little bit. And this vocal right here, I don't like the way he's saying this right here, so I'm going to chop it up, and I'm going to move these words around, or I'm going to cut this in 2, and then I'm going to use this in the front part of the phrase and this in the back part of the phrase. And this bass patch right here is cool and everything, but, I don't like the sound of it that much, so I'm just going to use it on the downbeats instead of through the whole thing. I mean, I can already see how being creative, to me, being creative is an exercise in limitations.
Yeah, definitely. I think about like the idea of well, if I was given, we talk about a lot of minimalist kind of mixing ideas, and it's like a lot of the same things that I do, I use the same kind of samples sometimes, but I'll process them completely differently and end up with a vastly different result. But it's the same source, and the limitation of like, well, that this isn't the sound that I'm looking for, but I can make it the sound that I'm looking for. That idea is really kind of a cool thing whenever it happens.
Right. There's nothing that inspires quite like a deadline. And you were talking about the Pareto principle where, Parkinson's Law. Parkinson's Law says that, a task will expand or contract given how much time you give it.
Yeah.
If you have to be done in an hour, then you'll be done in an hour. And if you have to be done in 6 days, then you'll be done in an hour on the last hour of the 6 days, probably.
Yeah.
It will expand and contract. And I have found that I even set myself fake deadlines like you did. Like, well, there's really not a deadline here, but by Friday I'm going to be done with this. But I want to give one caveat though. I think I recently scared off a client because they were the super creative type that they're barely getting things done, turned in, and then when you work with a professional who has lots of work to do, they tend to take those uber creative guys that don't have deadlines, or the guys that they do have deadlines. That's how they're getting things done. Like for my sake, it was like, or in my case, it was like, hey, we've already booked the release party of this, but we don't even have the vocals done. So that's his deadline, and he was done. So I am sitting here going, I don't want to mix. I don't want him to think that release party for this record is his deadline, because it's not, because I'm going to need, some time there. And I think that I scared him a little bit with my deadline, because now suddenly his deadline is not, March 1st or June 1st or whatever his deadline was. Now it's, 4 weeks earlier or 3 weeks earlier. And I think I scared him off, because it was like, I think I'm going to go with someone who's maybe not as busy or whatever, or that won't hold me to these deadlines so tightly.
Yeah.
So just be careful when you impose deadlines that you don't scare the people that you're holding the deadline to,
Absolutely. I think, in those cases, like with deadlines and with self-imposed things like that, I think, it being a self-imposed thing, like on yourself, is probably the key there. Because I know what I'm comfortable with, and so I can fully expect to set good deadlines for myself. Whereas with other people, it's like the idea of like what a long time to work on a project is versus a short time to work on a project is vastly different. There's clients that I've had, and they'll go into the studio and they'll be, in and out of the studio for a year and they'll work on a thing for a whole year. Whereas like a lot of other people that I work with, they'll go in and it'll be like bang, 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 where it's like two days and they're in and out and they've got a whole album now. And it's, and so, different people work in different ways and get to really, really cool places in vastly different timelines. And whenever if the person who's more accustomed to the 2 days in and out is working with the person that is like, oh no, let's take all the time we need. Let's just do it by the end of the year. If those two people kind of get together, depending on what their personalities are like, that could have some potential for some conflict and that sort of thing. So I mean, it's always for me, it's more of a self-imposed kind of thing.
Right. Well, deadlines can be fun, I think. I mean, because me and my daughter, we have little deadlines that we meet all the time. Like, for instance, when we jump in the car, we're ready to go. We try to. We don't want to sit in the car for 10 minutes while people buckle their seatbelts and things like that. So my daughter and I, we have this little game we play. It was just like, it's the buckle contest. And she has to get her seatbelt buckled before I do. And I have to shut the doors and turn the car on and all that kind of stuff. And, of course, I pace myself a little bit. But it gamifies the deadline. If you think the deadline is I've got to get my seatbelt buckled before my dad does, that's a game, and if we frame it like that, we can be hopefully a lot more productive. And I want to mention one other story too that I heard. One of my favorite groups right now is a group called Little Big Town out of Nashville, and I've kind of watched their career as they've gone. It seems like on this last couple of records, they've been working with this producer named Jay Joyce, and Jay Joyce is he's one of the guitar players that played for on the Wallflowers, One Headlight record that's still one of my favorite records and mixes. Anyway, he has moved to Nashville and he's producing now. And if I'm not mistaken, I could be terribly mistaken, but I know the premise of this is correct. I just don't know the exact timeline. But the record that Pontoon, the first record that he did for them, if I'm not mistaken, they wrote and produced and finished that record in a short amount of time. If I'm not mistaken, it was 6 days in the studio. They did most of the work in 6 days. It may have been 6 weeks, but even at 6 weeks, it was by Nashville's standards a very, very short timeline. And if you listen to that record, it's nice. It's a really nice record. It's won lots of awards, and it's really put them on a new plane. Okay, I tried to do a little research on the exact amount of time that Jay Joyce and A Little Big Town spent on the record Tornado, which is the one I talked about in the podcast. I could not find where that was. I'm sure that I've heard it, but suffice it to say that it was a short time period, because I've read other interviews where he likes to work fast, and I think that's kind of cool. I will leave you with this story, though. One time, back in the 90s, when I was doing records, and we did a large sum of recordings in one, we called them 3 for 10s. It was 3 records that they would sell for $10, and so they would do all cover tunes. And I remember doing one session where we did 30 songs. I did 30 mixes in one day. Now, I didn't do it by myself. I did it with a friend. He was mixing vocals. I was mixing the band and putting them to tape, 1/4-inch tape. And you know what? When I listen back to those mixes, I don't have them now, but when I listened back to them several years later, I remember kind of lifting my eyebrows and saying, that's not bad. So I think there's something that happens when you put a limitation on something like that. So go out and try it. Hope that inspires you to maybe do something faster than you normally would, just to see what you get, okay? Hey, it's worth a try. Hey, thanks for listening to the podcast today. I'll talk to you soon.